I have, and I'm just going through the entitlement phases so that I can break ground. And then the last two phases, again, are construction. The difference between a developer, which, when I started SDG back in 2019, right before COVID, by the way, and I'm glad I was a developer, because that would have been a tough conversation. But a developer, to me, the difference is, quite honestly, is just, the commitment to having W-2 employees. In my career, I probably managed twice. And that was right out of school when I worked at Fifth Third. I managed 12 call center employees. And then when I was at the Port Authority, I had 2 direct reports. Outside of that, I never managed because it just wasn't my cup of tea. And when I started Sanders Development Group, I understood that, and one of the misconceptions is you see developers on these big deals, and you think it's just them doing all the work. Because I have people a lot of times ask me, how are you doing all these projects? But a developer, what you are is you're kind of like a movie director. You're finding all the different pieces and actors and who's going to fund the project, all of those different things so that you can actually create a movie, AKA housing project or mixed use development. And it's your responsibility from start to finish to make sure that thing is successful. So that's that's what I would say the difference is between a company. From a company standpoint, just me personally, I've in my career, even in business banking and as working for another development company, there was never another Robert in the room or even a black woman in the room. It was always the only person in the room. So the reason I said I wanted to start my own company is to provide exposure. So I've got an African-American male that worked at the city who's now my development manager working for me, and then his friends are going to get knowledge from him. He's going to partner with other folks and sort of to have that sort of multiplier effect. And I can't do that just as a one-man shop. Also, too, sometimes you're forced to do things that you don't think you're ready for, and the universe tells you you got to. Unfortunately, last year I actually lost a sibling, and I was a one-man show. And during that time, you can't stop working. Like, you got projects, you got deadlines, permits, and all of those different things to take care of. And I really didn't get to take time off. So that was sort of the universe saying, hey, wait a minute, now's the time. You got to do this. And so I made the decision to start hiring. And, I don't know if I'd have necessarily made that decision on my own to be obviously I wish that would happen under different circumstances, but sometimes you got to listen to the universe and help it guide you to where you want to go.
Yeah. So I want to pull on this thread a little bit more because you said some really great things. And so first I want to talk about, I love the simplicity of like a developer does everything before you put the shovel in the ground, right? That's very simple. But then can you also elaborate on then that relationship between a developer and investors? And so as you know, for this conference and this track, we had a track for people who are just really interested in investment.
Okay.
Right? Like they're like, I don't want to do any of that other stuff. I'm not picking up a hammer. I have some capital. I want to invest. So as a developer, right? And so they're doing things that before the shovel's in the ground. What is a developer's relationship and role with investors?
Yeah, so you probably heard the rule of thumb is to get relationships before you actually need them. So thankfully, I had the benefit of working for other development companies, which exposed me to the brokerage community, which exposed me to the financial sector. I was a business banker. I specialized in SBA lending, so that gave me a lot of knowledge and insight into underwriting companies. So what happens is all of that knowledge from being able to understand the operations of the port and the mechanics of subsidies at the city level, understanding credit, finance, all of those different things, I can actually speak intelligently to an investor. And what it really all boils down to is 2 things, actually. The first one is relationship, but the relationship doesn't necessarily matter if you don't have credibility. And so it's really important as a developer to establish credibility before you go asking people for money, if that makes any sense. And I kid you not, just because of the word development, you got people that can get really anxious and going out to raise capital. And I've had people tell me they raised about $50,000, and I said, let me see your pro forma. And they're like, I don't have a pro forma. I'm like, what? What are you doing? So
take the time the relationship is important. One, you want to keep them abreast of different deals that you're looking at. Also, too, different investors are going to want to invest in different projects. I've got investors right now that won't even take a look at an office site, but they'll do multifamily, they'll do mixed use. And so having a pool of investors for every different type of asset class that, you're going to chase. And when I say asset classes, I mean office, industrial, mixed use, residential. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And then I want you to answer one other thing. So you would say, as a developer, when you say all of the activities before shovel goes into the ground, and a major part of those activities is the relationship building with investors and understanding what investors want to invest in, and then understanding your relationship to the investors, right? So, what your niche is, whatever you do, that you're going to be talking to certain types of investors, and certain types of investors are not going to be interested in it. And so a big part of the development work is that relationship management. And when we talk about relationship management, I think the thing that's also important is that, that's remembering birthdays and anniversaries. That is having stationery. And that is following up with handwritten notes. That's going to the happy hour that you really don't want to go to because all you want to do is go home and go to bed and put your feet up. But it's stopping by and saying hello, right? So there are these soft skills that are also important. And relationship management isn't just, I know you and we've exchanged cards, but I know what you're interested in. Right, I know what I'm following you. So if you meet an investor or you meet someone that works at a bank and you know they got a promotion, sending that email saying, hey, congratulations, right? That there is a larger piece, and even if that isn't your strong suit, and as Robert said, you start to build out that support, who's in your office or who's on your team to manage that for you, to remind you that you need to have this sort of deeper understanding of the investor, the investment group, et cetera.
And one quick comment to that, Reggie, because you said it. The key word that Reggie's talking about is sales. I have no doubt in my mind. There was a time in my career where I wasn't willing to take a commission just because I had financial obligations when I was younger. But as I got older, I saw business development officers, and their role really looked attractive. And I was terrified of sales, just period, just getting in front of people and actually talking. I'm an introvert. I didn't want to do that. But I took on the challenge of taking more responsibility and asked my boss, can I do the sales role? And I remember sitting in front of presentations that I was going to go into and literally thinking about leaving. For real, because I can underwrite, right? I can still make money, but I did it. I challenged myself, and had I not done that, I don't think I would be as good at sales owning a company at this point. And so the lesson I want to point out with that is in development, in order to be a good developer and a development company, you actually have to be comfortably uncomfortable every day.
So for Seth and Rachel, let's come to Rachel first, and then Seth, I want you to follow up with this. And so Robert has laid out this great foundation. And so when we think about Price Hill Will, and we think about the Price Hills, right? And the developers that are working in that community, I have a two-part question for you. So one, sort of describe the type of development that's happening in the Price Hills, because it's going to be very different than what was happening in College Hill, right? And so the people who are going to come to Price Hill or you're going to attract are going to be very different. So when we're talking about structuring your company, I want to paint a picture of the different types of development companies and how they work in communities, because all development companies aren't the same and they don't all work in the same communities. It's really specific. So describe the type of development that's happening in the Price Hills, and then what are the components or the type of development companies that work best and are best positioned to work in your community. And then Seth, you're going to answer that for College Hill.
So Robert talked earlier about how being a developer is like being like a movie director, correct? I think of community development as being more like, so when I was in high school, I learned how to drive on my dad's 1979 Pontiac Bonneville, which is gigantic, right? And I always felt like I wasn't really driving, I was sort of steering this gigantic ship in a sort of a direction, right? And that's how community development feels to me, right? So, you've got lots of people hanging on, probably too many people squished in the back seat, maybe somebody's hanging out the window, but you're generally trying to keep people moving in the same direction. It feels a little scary, as Robert said, you're always feeling a little uncomfortable, like we don't know what we're doing here. Hopefully I don't crash into something, but it's about that like overarching vision and mission and trying to keep generally moving in the same direction. So I think about that every day because that's kind of how every day feels to me. The developers that are doing work in Price Hill right now, like we talk to everybody who wants to come to the neighborhood and do something. Because first of all, I think it's important for them to be competent, to do good work, to know what's going on in our neighborhood, to have an idea of our neighborhood demographics, like who's living there now, who's moving in. It's really important for us that those developers are seeing the opportunity that we see in the neighborhood with our neighbors. If we have developers who are coming in who just want to do, a huge LIDIC project and are not really like talking to neighbors about what you want to see here, what kind of amenities do you want, that's really not going to be a good fit for our neighborhood. Because our neighborhood, I would say, we don't have the healthiest real estate market at this point. We're working on it, but we have a little ways to go. We also have a lot of predatory developer folks who are circling. Try not to hit them with a car, if possible. A couple of them have gotten hit along the way. But, you have those folks who, basically see your neighborhood as, a bunch of folks that are victims, right? Which I find to be incredibly personally offensive. But also, if they just see this neighborhood as a place where they're going to make a bunch of money and they're not going to really commit to doing something that is building equity for our neighbors, creating businesses that folks want to shop at, we do a lot of home ownership, those kinds of things. If they just see this as a place to make money and take off, we're really not going to support them. And so a lot of those conversations happen around this is what our mission and vision is for the community, and again, this is really informed by residents, and we're continually updating that. So what is your vision and mission? How do you see yourself building onto that? So we are lucky right now in that we do have some really high quality for-profit developers here that are based in Cincinnati that are doing good work. We're going alongside them, helping them do those good projects. In the Price Hills, it's really important to preserve existing buildings because we've seen so much demolition over the years. I don't know about your all's neighborhoods, but for a long time it was just there's not a lot of value here, and just a lot of buildings were torn down, so we have a lot of empty teeth. So preservation is really important. Again, supporting business opportunities for local residents is really important to us. So we really, hold the feet to the fire of those other developers. Are you going to help us preserve these businesses? What is that space going to look like? Is it going to stay affordable? And those are the folks that we choose to work with.
So Seth, before you take over, so the thing that I hear from you, Rachel, is that there's this sense of, in the Price Hills, of having a mission centric and mission focused developer. And, obviously with development, you need to make money. And I think we just weirdly in our culture, we live in a capitalist society, and so whenever someone needs to make money, we're like, oh, they're doing it for the money. Yes, we are all doing it for the money, right? Nobody wants to be broke. I'm not trying to be broke. Please. That's usually people with money who do that. They're like, you're doing it for the money. Yes, because you ain't grow up poor.
Yeah.
Yes, I am trying to get paid, and you're not gonna shame me about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is this reality.
Sure.
That there has to be this structure where you can make money, right? But there also then is this component of, I want to make a profit and I want to do it in a way that has XYZ social benefits.
Right.
And that is one way to structure your development company, right? And I know, and for me, I don't want to make a value hierarchy judgment, but one is to say I want to make a profit and also have these social impacts, right? These social impacts that I want to have. But then there are other ways to structure your development company where you don't, it isn't necessarily all about the money, but it can be a little bit more programmatic. And so, Seth, I want you to talk about College Hill, because I think that College Hill is interesting because I think it's a blend of mission, but you also had some projects where there was someone who was a developer that could come in and they could just do it because you needed someone who was like, oh, just a good developer that can get it done. And it didn't always have to be mission focused. It was about someone that was going to be able to fulfill the sort of the brief.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting spot to kind of sit here with the blend. The big difference between Rachel and College Hill is, for Rachel, she has 3 neighborhoods. Collectively, I mean, it's probably somewhere north of 30,000 people that she is responsible for fitting into her big boat of a car. For me, I had 5 blocks of business district. I mean, that was it. I didn't walk further than 1 block off it. It took me about 5 years before I knew any street outside of Hamilton. And I didn't want to, because I didn't want to have that mission creep that popped in. But with that finite amount of opportunity, became the ability to really hone in on exactly what our end goal was, which was 5 blocks of business district ultimately thriving. At the time, we had about half a block that was thriving. And so the other thing that we didn't have going for us, because we were so hyper-focused, was we didn't have a lot of operating dollars coming in. And so if you think about it from the investor standpoint, we had to generate our own money. And the investors in College Hill that were willing to give us money to kind of get started were not willing to give it to hire staff. And so the money that they gave us on the front end really went toward acquisition of buildings. And so if you're going to buy a building, you get a choice between a vacant building that is going to cost you money every single year until you can figure out how to fix it, or a building that might give you some money that will still cost you things, but you're going to have cash at the end of it to reinvest in the next thing. I wish I could say we were doing that strategically. We just were desperate and grabbed the opportunities that came our way. But because of that, we actually built a development corporation that I just found out yesterday controls about 72% of the exterior land within the 5 blocks of College Hill Business District. Through that, though, there was a lot of vacancy. And so, one, we focus on becoming not just a development corporation and figuring out how you can fix these buildings and stop kind of the cash drain on a vacant property, but keeping people living in the business district and active in the business district, and thus producing the cash to reinvest in the business district was really key. So we became a property developer too. Using the movie director-producer analogy, which I've often thought of, if I ever get tired of city council, I'm going to Hollywood. I'm not kidding. Like, it's a very similar path, because the first thing you think about with a movie is the box office, right? We always see these numbers of XYZ movie made, $100 million this weekend. That's amazing. That's not where they make their money. They make their money on the back end when you go and rent it off HBO or whatever, right? That $2.99 adds up really fast. And so development company, you on the front end, you gotta get the development fee, you gotta get it done. But on the back end is the property management. And for the first 15, 20, 30, 40 years, you're not making a lot of money because you're paying off the debt on the building. But then all of a sudden it comes due and there's a lot of equity that's existing for it. So College Hill kind of try to catch in on the front end of that equity side, and using that to become a property manager. The better you are as a property manager, the better you maintained your buildings are going to be, the more money is going to come in for you to allow you to take more risk as a development company. The second part, though, was that created the market for some of these missing teeth that our community, aka the investors, were saying, this is why you guys are here. It's not just for you to make money and to do fun little videos online. It's to do College Hill Station. It's to do Marlowe Court. It's to do some of these other development concepts to it. And as we made an opportunity for it, then we started attracting in developers and saying, hey, we've got 7 acres here. What do you want to do with it? And how does that blend in? And we did take some of Rachel's components to this, which is ultimately we had to have the community vision and the goal of what we wanted to achieve. As we were rebuilding our business district right in the heart of the business district, the northernmost end shouldn't become the new heart of the business district. You're going to completely undercut yourself and kill all these businesses. So that was important as we talked to developers. Some were like, we're going to drop 500 units of housing right here, and it's going to be the most important thing in College Hill. And we're like, yeah, that's not happening. Others were like, we're going to basically blend in with the neighborhood and have very little impact. And so we're trying to find that kind of middle ground. But then we started thinking, for us as a community, we also want to have some ownership. Again, movie producer style. I like when you rent those movies on HBO. So we started negotiating small percentage ownership within these deals themselves, because, hey, we're doing the work with the city to put the land together, to get the incentives structured. Ultimately, that has a cost. Even if you don't know what that cost is, it has a cost. And they would often say back, hey, we have a cost too. We're signing our possibly our homes away on these developments. That's a cost. So we would take the lower percentage. That ultimately 30 years from now, when none of us in this room are thinking about this, will be when College Hill makes money. But we also focus on the things that matter, and I think it's important to keep this in mind because the really successful developers in the city have kind of realized this as well, which is how do most people interact with your development? And it's through the exterior and it's through your commercial spaces. It's not necessarily just the residential. One person lives in that apartment, but everybody drives by your building and sees it. And I'm circling back. I think I may have missed your point, Reggie, but I do want to hit this really important point. When I was sitting out in the audience, coming up the ranks and figuring out how development worked, I was always wondering how everybody seemed to know each other up here. And it's because we're constantly talking to each other, because we're constantly, like movie producers and directors, not knowing what's coming next and trying to figure out the next thing. Rachel and I were always talking about various things that were going on in Price Hill because that impacted College Hill. Robert and I have known each other since he was in the Port days, and I bailed on him right before I went to City Council. He was trying to help me out in a project just north of College Hill. Rachel's reached out to me about projects we did in College Hill where I said, hey, that developer was great to work with. You should absolutely work with them. Or that developer sells you a really great bill of goods, but here's the 5 questions you need to ask them because I guarantee you're going to find out that they're not coming through for you. And that matters. And so when I talk about like the exterior of the building, that's what the communities care about. But it also tells kind of like what was going on for me. That was my litmus test for a developer and what I wanted to invest in as we talk about investors. And so, again, I may have missed your point, Reggie. Sorry about that. But I think it's really important to think about that as you're structuring it is, one, it's a long game too, and also we're always talking, and you guys are going to be part of that conversation too, which is really fun.
Yeah. No, you didn't. But I'm gonna focus the answer because you did answer it. And so when Rachel was speaking, Rachel talked so much about mission, right? There's a neighborhood that has a deep history of historic preservation, a history of predatory investors circling, lots of infill development, and this. And a real idea of how the neighborhood wants to thrive. And so finding developers who want to operate within that mission is critical, right? And then for Seth, he had this kind of very tight, almost narrow mandate, 5 blocks of a business district, right? And we know that business districts have to be able to generate revenue. You have to build developments that support the generation of that revenue. And so there's going to have to be a focus on market rate development so that you have people who have capital who can support multiple restaurants and things, right? And so now that's a different, you definitely can attract mission-driven folks, right? Or affordable folks, or folks who want to fulfill sort of social impacts, but you also need folks who are going to be able to deliver a product that's going to generate revenue to support a business district. The thing that you brought up that I think is great to go into is about, so when you think about structuring your development company, we've talked about mission, we talked about what your product is, but now we have to think about, are you also going to have a hold or a participation in property management? Because property management is a whole different beast than development, but your property management is your PR. Because you want to know what people don't know? They don't know that you threw together a great pro forma. They don't know that you delivered you delivered it on time. They don't know that you were just a lovely developer. What they know is what they see driving down their street every day. And so if you develop this awesome building and then you turn it over to a not great property manager, that becomes what people think of the developer. And most people don't know the difference between the property manager and the developer. And because in sort of popular narratives, developers are evil people, people will say, oh, that developer is terrible. Look at the lawn. Look at the blinds that are raggedy, right? And they don't necessarily say that the property management, right, is not holding that up. So as you begin to think about your work, you have to think about that the thing that's going to sell you is what that project looks like 3, 5, 7 years later, not what you delivered in that moment, right? And so with that, Robert, I just want to go to you really quickly, and I want you to talk a little bit about, from your development perspective, how you think about the longevity of your projects, right? Because you don't do property management for any of your projects, but you also
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, see, so not yet. But also, you've been doing this for a while, and you have an incredible reputation, and people want to work with you. So how are you doing that? What are the things that you're doing to cement like reputational legacy?
Yeah, so first of all, there's a reason I don't do property management, and it's actually the same reason I don't do construction yet. I love real estate because it's one of the most leveraged opportunities that you can take advantage of from an investment standpoint. And my thought has always been, even as a 25-year-old getting out of school, I said I'm gonna own a lot of property, and then I'm gonna retire and collect checks from real estate. And so when I started the company, that was the mindset. And quite frankly, I don't really like construction. I just don't. It's not creative, in my opinion. It's not creative. You're still problem solving, but you're problem solving in a process-oriented way. So I think the important thing to that is I didn't start off with a construction company. Why? Because I don't like doing it. I'm not good at it. And what would have happened if I did go and do that just because I can be an MBE and make all sorts of dollars, but I don't like it, it's not my brand, and I'm not gonna be successful at it, and guess what? Now my brand is damaged. So I've been really careful with respect to taking on opportunities and starting businesses that could negatively impact my brand if I'm not interested in them. Property management is the same way. Who wants to get a phone call on Saturday at 8:30 p.m. because there's a toilet out in a commercial building, by the way, right? So from protecting the brand is just making sure that you do any and all things to protect that brand at all costs. Sometimes what that means is taking the fall. If and a client has a disagreement, it 100% happens. And at the end of the day, we can't have anyone saying we had a bad experience with SDG, even though it's never our fault, actually. But actually, I'm gonna elaborate on that. So we talked about the confusion around development, and it's really important if you're gonna become a development company. What you have to understand is, yes, African Americans and women have not really been involved in development over the history of development in a major way. So what that means is the general public also too. I challenge you to go to one community meeting in Hyde Park or Price Hill, and you will see it's not a black or white thing. Just most of the general public just doesn't understand development. So now what you do is you flip that to, I'm trying to sell a client on my development services, and again, most people don't even know what that looks like. They think it's construction. So you really have to give an incredible amount of energy and effort into explaining in a great way, in a great deal, in detail, and documenting what you're gonna do for the client. That way, if something comes up, you can point back to it and say, wait a minute, here's what we talked about at our initial meeting. Here's the metrics that we delivered. And quite honestly, I made that mistake early on. I thought, everybody knows about development, right? But I learned the hard way, like, no, they were thinking something else. And, I had to bite the bullet on that, take it as a learning lesson. And now we document a lot better, and we do a much better job at communicating what we're gonna provide, what services we're gonna provide to our clients. And I don't know if you guys know this or not, but there's fee-based development, then there's ownership-based development. I'm talking about fee-based development where companies or individuals will hire us to assist them. And so that's really important. That's how we've protected our brand.
Can I jump in real quick? There's a point here that I think is really important to emphasize. I always say development happens in darkness. From the community development standpoint, it was really great for marketing purposes, but it is really critical to keep in mind. If you think about when development's going to happen, either it was a vacant lot or it's a historic building, people weren't going into it in the first place. They don't know the condition more often than not that you're walking in on. They don't know what it's like to walk in and smell the mold and the asbestos and all the other stuff that is just disturbing. Then when you start construction, people can't go on site because it's dangerous. And then when it's done, it's presumably somebody's home. So the average outside person experience with development is purely darkness. So their experience with it is there was a building and either it's good or it's not good. Either it's done or it's not done. And if you keep that perspective in mind, you do over-explain in your mind. But for them, you're opening the door and shining the light on things that they're like, oh, there's what going on in there? That was in there? I love telling a story about this building we owned in College Hill called Murgard Lane's Bowling Alley. It's a gorgeous building. It's been hyped up in the Enquirer recently. I think it won an award for historic preservation. And I like to tell people that it only became possible because we found an alligator in there. Because, and I'm not even kidding, there was a tenant that had an alligator. Apparently he just let it go, and we ended up finding it afterwards during construction. But it's like weird things like that you can't even possibly experience and appreciate. That makes no sense. You guys have no idea how that relates to the building being done at the end of the day. It doesn't matter. Being able to tell those stories, like that's why we had to do this construction, because that guy was going to burn the building down. We walked in enough times where he was doing stupid things, going to burn the building down. People don't appreciate that because development happens in darkness. So keep that in mind as you go about this. When people are angry at you, they're not angry at you. They just don't know what's happening. So over-explain. It's not over-explaining.
Rachel, when you talk about protecting your brand, so, you know, I, in the most generous way, I think the Price Hills community, they have a healthy dose of skepticism, you know, with folks who are trying to come in for good reason because of the predatory piece. But you have you head a development company that people trust, right? They trust you. They trust if Rachel weighs in, they're like, okay, this is good. And so, right, and so you interact with developers, and so you act as sort of like a validator. But can you, to Seth's point about development happening in darkness, can you share some of the things that you do from a community development perspective and how you facilitate relationships with developers so that people get a little bit of that light, sort of like shown on the work? Like, how are you helping to illuminate the process? Because again, when we start to think about like structuring your companies, we keep talking about a lot of these like soft skills that will be the make or break of your development company. Like the hard skills you can learn, the financing and the pro forma and the lending and the closures and the entitlements. That stuff is like hard, fast, finite. Like you can get a grasp around that, but the people who are successful is all of these soft sides of how you talk about that, how you engage. And so will you share about how you help like shine that light on the process so that people feel they can trust the development?
Sure. So I would say, first of all, it is about trust and relationships. I think you've heard all day about relationships and how important that is. We spend a lot of time listening to folks, and it's not just at the community council meetings. I think Robert kind of alluded to community councils. I mean, they're a valid constituency, but they don't really truly represent the neighborhood, right? When I look at, for example, East Price Hill, I look at the demographics of East Price Hill today, and it's about 1/3 white, 1/3 black, and 1/3 Hispanic. A lot of those folks have been displaced from other places, right? So our Hispanic populations are coming like right now from Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico. Black folks have been displaced from other places here in Cincinnati, like when the West End Hope 6 project happened. So we have a lot of folks who are vulnerable, who've been displaced already, who don't trust. And so therefore it's important for us to continually like reach out to folks. Again, I know you hear that phrase like meet them where they are, but really understand the trauma that folks have been through. Some a couple generations ago, some 2 weeks ago. And so we do that in lots of ways that is not, community council meetings or a community engagement session. So, for example, one of our programs that we created 14 years ago now is called My Cincinnati. It's a youth orchestra program. We provide free instruments to any kid who lives in Price Hill who wants to learn a musical instrument. And we provide all the instruments, all the teachers, everything. So it's a completely free program. Kids come every day after school. We have about 135 kids, and then we also connect with their families through potlucks and all those things. But those, what a fourth grader will tell their trusted teacher over a violin is dramatically different than what you're going to hear at a community council meeting. And that's like the real information about what's really happening to real families in the neighborhood. So it's that, again, extremely on the ground kind of work that I think really sets the stage for future development. We also, again, in our development, we are the owner developer, and property management is extremely important to us that the quality of things looks good, and we hear from folks if weeds get a little long or anything like that. But through the entire development process, we are talking to folks in the community, sharing struggles, talking about now we found this, we haven't found an alligator in a building yet, but we found all kinds of other weird things, or there's a title issue or something, and just really being extremely open and transparent about every step of the way, and not just telling folks what's happening, but kind of commiserating over it. I think most folks are compassionate, and if they see you as a person who is trying to do this really tough thing, or they see your group as a group trying to take on this tough challenge, and you can maybe ask them how they could be helpful. Some folks like to, pray with you. Some folks like to, bake you some baked goods. Some folks just like to listen to you vent and maybe come up with a new strategy. Again, back to my gigantic car analogy, I think having more people around the table really does make for better decisions. Sometimes it can, slow things down a little bit, but I think in the end you have a better result. And it feels good to be in that community space where other folks are also saying shit, this is really tough. This is a tough thing, but we're gonna do this together, and then everybody has a sense of ownership over it.
So what I love about this conversation, and why I think, again, when we start to talk about structuring, right, your development company, and I want to keep coming back to this, is because when you start to think about how you're building this, you have to build time for bandwidth, emotional time, bandwidth to do the work. One of the things I've always been struck by when I talk to friends who are developers or people who worked in community development corporations, I cannot tell you, and I know this, and I haven't even had these specific conversations with them, how many times these three folks have been in some neighbor's kitchen talking to a resident about something not related to the development, right? In order to ease the tension, in order to settle a fight. We sort of think about development work, and there's this real, each of you can tell me, I'm sure, a couple stories where intimate information about a resident's life, because you were in their driveway, you were in their kitchen, you weirdly were standing in their bathroom with them because they were pointing to some sort of leak, and be like, well, why should let you build when this is leaky, that you're awkwardly standing with this stranger in their bathroom looking at this leak, and you're like, what does that have to do with development? You had to have the time. You had to have and to understand that was a part of this. And so I want to move into this segment. So when we start to think about components of a successful development company, Rachel, I'm going to start with you, and then we're going to go down. Rachel, can you just share, some of the top things, and when you have worked with, one, even how you structure Price Hill Will, and also two, when you work with developers who have been successful, and you look at them from an organizational structure perspective, what are some things that have been in place that you feel were critical to the success of that developer?
Teamwork, collaboration, but honesty. I think Robert, you kind of alluded to this earlier. Everybody kind of feels all the time I don't really know what I'm doing here, or this new surprise is going to pop up. But for folks to be honest about I am struggling with this thing, or this thing is a new challenge that I've not had the opportunity to decide yet. I think being open and honest about how are we going to figure this out together, I think is really key. And then ultimately, as much as teamwork is important, there has to be somebody at the end of the day. Unfortunately, right now for me, it's me at Price Hill Will, has to be the ultimate decider, right? Of we've talked to everybody, we've driven the car, 20 miles down the road, but at some point we have to say like, yes, we're gonna do this, or no, we're not gonna do this, and then deal with the, real consequences of putting that plan into action. That is a tough place to be in sometimes, but it does take, again, hearing from everybody, but ultimately making that final decision. And then again, I think sort of back to the, teamwork aspect, folks that are really able to pull together flexible folks that like have all those skill sets around the table, like, a good attorney who really understands real estate, who really understands, your ability to take on risk, a good insurance company. I mean, so we can have a whole separate section on insurance because it's such a mess right now. Of course, good bankers and underwriters, but really folks who appreciate the end goal for us, again, being very mission focused, like what is the end that we're trying to achieve here and how can we all be a part of that?
Yeah, not to reiterate most of those points, I agree with everything, so I'm going to try to add something here. One point of contact, I think, is really important that will return your phone call. And that's like one of the most important things. You want to talk about bandwidth, you want to talk about having to hire somebody. It's the point when you can't return people's phone calls anymore that it becomes a problem. You start developing that reputation that nobody can get a hold of you. Every developer that I know that's kind of fallen off the wayside is at that moment when you can't get a hold of them anymore. People are incredibly patient. They're willing to work with you. They understand that this is complicated and this is hard. It's the moment that you're not willing to communicate that anymore that things just go south, and then the problems start to emerge. And people that get the biggest risks taken on them are the ones that will return the phone call. That so and so will always answer if I call. They're always going to tell me what's going on, where things are at. That cannot be overstated. Two, I think the ability to communicate honestly is really, really key. Within your partnership as well as out to the community. That becomes critical. The most successful developer I've ever known doesn't know how to lie at all. He would always go into the community and they would say, can you get this construction started by date X? And he'd be like, nope, I can do it by date Y. And they'd hate him. And they'd yell at him and they'd scream at him. And then by date Y, they'd be like, well, you weren't lying. And it built this reputation with him that he pops around, and I see him constantly doing these developments, that people slowly start to believe, like, when he says something, it's true. If he says it can't be built, it doesn't matter that Joe Schmo comes in and says it can be built. He's saying it can't be built, and it's not going to get built. But if he says it can get built, if we do X, Y, Z, then it can get built. And that honesty component coming out of the development team is really critical. As well as, again, internally, being able to honestly have that conversation and say, one of the developments we were doing, Keymark in College Hill, I remember one of the first big meetings, they came in, they said, we have $1 million gap. This is after we depleted every city resource we possibly could have, and I was like, oh, that's a problem. And they're like, nah, we're good. Don't worry about it, we're good. And because he's always been honest on things, I didn't worry about it. I probably should have, but I didn't worry about it. It closed on time, and it was good, which kind of leads to puzzle solving. That's a really key component. And then I'm going to wrap it up with know your strengths. And I think too often, and I learned this the hard way, I spent the first 4 years in College Hill because so often in community development, it's such an intimate, personal experience. You're kind of like the coach of the small college football team where when the opportunity comes for you to go to wherever the next thing, no matter how much the community may hate you, it's a personal blow. You're destroying the program, right? Because they become so attached to you. I spent the entire first 4 years being like, who's going to be my successor? I want somebody like me to be my successor. And so I was always hiring people that were exactly like me. I understand why people don't like me all the time. And when I actually found success was when I found people that complimented me. When I'm really good at one-on-one conversations, so I need someone that can work a room. I'm really good at puzzle solving. I need someone that can execute and get it done. I don't like talking on the phone. I need someone that likes to talk on the phone. I found that person. College Hill went like this. So as you're looking for these other people, you don't have to have any of the skill sets we talk about, but you don't need 2 or 3 or 4 people that can all return phone calls but can't get the project done.
And Robert, before you go, I want to jump in, and so I just want to tie what Seth just said. And Seth, I like you 60% of the time, so I think it's okay. Yeah. 60% is very high, though. No, but remember in the keynote, it was actually my staffer Noah who asked the question. He was 25. He he's interested in development, and Majora said like, you can't do that. Don't do it alone. Don't go it alone. That theme has been repeated throughout the day. It really is about assembling a team of people to go at this, right? Like, you need that shared risk, but you also need that shared expertise. And so part of when you think about the foundation is who are the people that are going to do this with you? And even if it's, everyone may not be full-time, they may be part-time, but you have to assemble that team. And if you can't find a group of people to do it with, maybe listen to that, right? Maybe listen to that. Don't say, I just am surrounded by people who just don't want to do it, so I have to go it alone. It's like, no, maybe there's some work you need to do, or some rooms you need to be in, or some stuff that you need to do so that you can find people to do that work with. Robert, your perspective, components, right? And so you've built, a development company, and so from your transition from developer now to being a developer that has a development company, what are those components that you have felt are necessary for you to execute at the level that you want to execute?
Yep. So I'll start with this first. And it's nothing to do related to real estate. It's actually just integrity. Development is a space, if you watch TV or if you've seen the news or anything like that, it's a space that quite candidly, you can just run into some colorful people. And I'm just going to use the word colorful. You've got to be willing to say no to things that aren't mission aligned with who you are as a person. And even if it's, you can make a lot of money off of a development, but it doesn't make sense for the community, then don't do it, right? Just do something that the community can get behind, because there's going to be other opportunities to make money on deals. And I'll never do a deal where I think I'm going to lose money, but I'm also not going to do a deal where I'm going to make money and piss off an entire community. And so I share that to say, integrity is first and foremost, no matter what industry or business you're trying to run. From the standpoint of just development specifically, some of the other things are common sense. So I'm going to say some things that are not so common. But Reggie, you have said it actually. You got to have a team. And when I mean team, I'm not necessarily talking about, the legal team or my accountant, because again, those are things that you can pay for. You have those in place. You definitely have to have a commitment to those. But development, as you start to scale and you're having a company, if you think about it, development is ideation. Remember, you're making a movie. So you're creating something that nobody has seen before, right? And so you've got to convince these people that haven't seen this before that this makes sense. Guess how many people are going to tell you that's stupid or crazy? Like 9 out of 10. And that can become a very dark place if I can't call Reggie and say, I'm trying to do this. They're telling me this doesn't make sense. He's like, no, it still makes sense. Keep at it until you get to this point, right? And so being able to bounce ideas like that off of each other is huge. So I would encourage folks to, create a network. And I don't care if it's 1 or 2 people. Just have somebody that's in the same space that you can bounce ideas off of each other from, because quite candidly, that's what our community needs. We need more of us out here collaborating and doing work. The other things are just, again, I'm a commercial real estate developer, and so I speak uniquely to that. As you can imagine, where do end users come into play when you're doing commercial real estate? So you're talking retail, office, industrial. Well, guess who controls all the relationships with the end users? The commercial real estate brokerage company. So I would encourage everyone who's trying to get into development and wanting to scale, and if you're doing anything remotely commercial, make sure you have an established relationship with a few commercial real estate brokers. They're going to potentially bring you opportunities, and you need to be able to pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm getting ready to do a development in Forest Park, and I need to understand what the rents are being charged for retail or office. And guess what? Your pro forma makes more sense. Now when I go to the bank, they're like, where'd you get these numbers from? Cushman. Okay. right? If it's, oh, well, I seen this, my cousin has this shop, and like, nah, man, they ain't trying, they're not gonna listen to that. You know, so, and again,
No disrespect to your cousin,
no,
but
yeah, yeah, my cousin on his A game, but no, those are some of the things that I think are really important. And the last thing, you have to be, honestly, you got to be the best listener in the world. I really firmly believe that we're good at what we do because we listen. And I'm talking about being at a community council meeting, you know, talking about a $4 million project, and there's a resident talking about a Grippos bag in the vacant land site for 5 minutes, right? And it's like, we gonna spend 5 minutes on this, you know? But guess what? You leave and then you drive around, and it's like, man, there's some other trash in this neighborhood. Maybe we should talk to the community council about creating a cleanup crew. And so different things like that. If I'm not listening, if I'm just, you know, on my phone texting and not listening to that guy, I never go after that opportunity to create a cleanup crew in the neighborhood. So good listening skills, have a team. Definitely don't be willing to skimp on your legal representation. I argue, you know what, that's our biggest expense as a commercial real estate development company, our legal fees, not the architectural fees, not anything else you can think of, it's the legal fees, but you need that when you own real estate because it gets super complex.
I'm reminded of a story. So prior to being elected to council, I worked for a national nonprofit affordable housing developer, the Community Builders. And this company was in 14 states, 33 cities. And so I had the opportunity, my region was Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. And so I had the opportunity to work on a project in Indianapolis and met a developer. And it was a black woman. And she did something that I just thought was like so incredible. And it's just so simple. But she wanted to build this very dense development in a neighborhood that was, you know, disinvested, but really legacy of a very long home ownership legacy, and, you know, kind of a very NIMBY neighborhood. So you know what she did? She went and she knocked every door of the it was like 8 houses that would have the closest proximity. And she knocked them, and she made sure that she talked to every person. And they cursed her out. They're like, ain't no way we gonna let that build that thing. But she kept having conversations with them, and she left her card, and she left this sort of thing. And when she had to present to the community council, they were still hemming and hawing and, you know, bitching and moaning and this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, she got the support because that development wasn't in the necessarily darkness and wasn't this like, abstract person. They were like, oh, it's that, they would call it that woman, that's what she would say. They would say, that woman who always come knocking on our door when to build. I guess, you know, she did knocked on my door 3 times. I'm tired of her knocking on my door. But that sort of like retail, like service, I think is important. And then it comes back to also this idea of honesty. And I have said this when I worked in the DEI space, and I'll say this even now in the development space. Not everybody is cut out to do mission-driven work, right? I would tell predominantly white institutions all the time, why do you want to be diverse? Like, do you really want black people in the space? Or do you think that you want black people in the space? Because if you really want black people in the space, then you're gonna have to do something different. But if you think that you want black people in the space and you really don't want black, then don't, because black people ain't gonna come. We don't wanna come, you don't want us, right? It's a wash, right? So like, why are you even trying, right? You know what I mean? I don't want to come here anyway. But if you do, then you have to do the work. So I guess it's that if you say that you're starting a development company and you're like, I want to work in disinvested communities. So then know that you're going to be building and structuring a different company. You're going to be building and structuring a different company that is going to require you to have the capacity and space for these conversations in these times. You're going to need to have access to capital and finance that is more patient, right? Your returns are going to be smaller in the beginning because you're doing this mission-driven work. But if you don't have the access to that capital, you're not willing to do that work. So now you're thinking about a different type of development company. And there's no judgment around that. Right? Really be honest about what you want to do in that space. Because for some people, they're like, I want to build these type of buildings and I want to make this amount of money, right? So that's a little bit more programmatic. So now you're looking at neighborhoods, places, businesses that can support that development. In my opinion, both are fine. But you have to be very honest with yourself about what you want to do, right, with those spaces. So to wrap this, and then we'll do a quick Q&A, the last thing that I want you all to go through and talk about is that when you're thinking about structuring your development company, what is the role of pipeline, right? So what I have heard throughout the day here, and I remember in conversations from last developer conferences, people are saying like, okay, like, I want to do this, and like, I have this project now, but then like, what about the next project, right? Like, you know, like I'm nervous, like I'm already thinking about the next project. How do you think, and what is some advice you can give folks to allow them to be present on the project that they're working on, but to be able to start to think about development from a pipeline perspective, so that there is this sort of knowing that there's a next step beyond that. So let's actually start with Seth here to talk about pipeline, and then we'll go to Robert and end with Rachel.
Yeah, I mean, again, my experience was 5 blocks of business district, so probably a little bit of a very hyper-focused experience. But I just helped coach the new executive director through his first acquisition, and I'll give you guys the same bit of advice here. Every closing is a nightmare in the worst possible ways. You can't imagine what's going to go wrong, but something will go wrong, and it'll be unique each time in a new way to make your life miserable. And it is one of the most thrilling and fun experiences you'll go through in your life. It's also very stressful. And so for me, I found the pipeline, the way I was able to stay centered was that's a lot of stress. So when I get too stressed with that, I can pivot and I can think about something else. I can think about the new future, because you're so in the weeds by the time you're doing the project. To Robert's point, you kind of lose the creativity opportunities at that stage. You know what it's going to be. You know what it's going to look like. You've picked out the paint colors. Now you're just trying to get there, and it's very process oriented. And that is one part of your brain, and that can drive you nuts, where you're like, all right, I've talked about that red enough times. I want to see the red on the pillar. So I'm going to flip, and I'm going to start thinking about what could come next. And that takes time too. I would estimate that any project we were doing, even if it was a planter like you see outside, would be a 3-year project in College Hill. And so what do I want to look at in 2027? Where do I think we're going to be, and how do I start thinking creatively about that? And then you're doing that every year. You just kind of have this natural pipeline of the next thing is coming up for that miserable period of trying to get it closed, while also thinking about next year's thing where it's really exciting because it's starting to take shape, to the next one where it's like, it could be anything. We're going to build a gorgeous statue of Reggie Harris outside. And we're going to find, yeah, see, 70% now. And it made it more and more fun. And the things that I was looking at 3 years out, you know, maybe 1 out of 10 ever got to year 2. And from there, maybe 1 out of 10 got to year, close enough to me being able to get it done. And then 1 got done that year. And then people say, wow, you did $85 million worth of redevelopment in College Hill? And I was like, I guess. I don't know. But it was really fun.
I would say don't underestimate how long development takes, first and foremost. If you think your project is going to take a year, pencil in a year and a half. I mean, it is what it is. And then if you understand that, also make sure you understand the various phases of development. Again, I talked about conceptual, feasibility, pre-development, construction, and then lease up. Right? If you've got everything, if you look at your chart and everything is in conceptual, man, you're working on a bunch of ideas. You're not going to have any revenue coming in. And so also too, if you look at your pre-development and you've passed entitlements and you got projects that are moving through permit status, but you haven't talked to your investors, you better get on the phone and start raising capital. And so really being organized, and then Camry will tell you, like, we'll have a project list, and for one project in OTR, there'll be like 80 items on this follow-up list. And we got to track all those things and make sure we know where they are, because there's going to be a point where, okay, we need to go talk to the bank. All right, we need to green light the architect. And so you are unable to do that if you aren't tracking it. So you have to be incredibly organized to understand your pipeline so that you can execute. And so that's what I would say. Just one, know the duration of your projects. And for example, I started Triversity, the conversation, and then they weren't moved into the building until a year and 6 months later. So guess what? That's capital out the door that I'm not even seeing for another year and 6 months. Well, if you don't know that and you're thinking you're getting it 8 months, you got a problem in 7 months, right? So just understanding the duration of each construction type, whether it's new construction or just a rehab, understanding the city and how fast they get things done. Now you like me.
That was shade.
That was
We're working on it, okay? We are a work in progress. But don't count on a check from the city
absolutely.
to bridge that gap if you in a pinch. So you better plan.
But yeah, just understanding all those different things will help you with your pipeline. So.
And I will say, for pipeline, I mean, we're always looking forward about like what else can we acquire. Again, we're focusing on the neighbors, but really on the commercial corridors, like what are their acquisition opportunities? Because, in my experience, doing this for a long time now, the development process usually takes, for us, between 2 to 4 years, depending on how complex a project is. Once construction starts, it's like boom, right? It's done in like 9 months, a year, year and a half, and suddenly you're at lease up. So you always have to be building that pipeline because that timeline takes so much longer. I would also say that, for us, being able to control real estate so that whether or not we serve as the owner developer or we find a quality developer who will do that is really important so that we can, have a positive influence over development happening in our neighborhood. So pipeline is omnipresent every single day. Like what comes next? What are their opportunities? Again, for us being so connected with folks in the community, it's really important because we hear all of the time from folks in the community about like, this building's for sale, I heard about this, and that's where we've been able to make some of our, I think, most strategic acquisitions is, hearing from folks and building that pipeline, even if you don't quite know what you're gonna do with it yet. I'll give you one quick example. So before I started at Price Hill Will, Price Hill Will acquired a former Masonic Lodge. It's 21,000 square feet, it's gigantic, it had been vacant for 35 years. It was a local landmark. Folks really in the neighborhood wanted to see it saved, but there was no plan for it. Price Hill Will, thank God, took a leap and said, we will buy this property. They bought it for $20,000, but in the end, it cost us $10 million to renovate it. So that is a huge leap, and that's generally not something I would say, just jump off the cliff. For us, it's a little different being mission-driven, but, we knew, for our pipeline, for that neighborhood, that we had to do that building. Nobody else was going to do it. It's catalytic. It's making other things happen. So it was a calculated risk. And when you take a calculated risk, you always have to have, I think, 7 backup plans of how you're going to get out of it in the end, right? So, we'll renovate it, we'll sell it to somebody else, all of those things. But that happens a lot in that pipeline conversation too. If we're going to take a risk on, acquiring this and dreaming this, what do we do if it doesn't work out? How can we have a way to get out from underneath this this potential deal that doesn't end up being anything but a dream? So.
Hey, please.
Yeah.
The very first thing I was taught when I went to College Hill was you're going to finish projects you didn't start, and you're going to start projects you don't finish. And I think that sums it up.
I was gonna, something similar to that is that, and also when you start to think about pipeline, give yourself a break. Maybe don't do 3 very stressful projects in a row if you can. And then the last thing, and I can't remember, Rachel, if you said this a couple years ago, but there was someone that said, or it said, it might have been you, but something that really sort of struck me that just came up now is that people's relationship to buildings. And so this idea of when you are a developer, you are also someone that is interacting with memory, right? And so all neighborhoods have it. You go to your own neighborhood and there's a vacant lot and you say, oh, the place where the Burger King used to be, right? For 20 years, for some people, that has been a vacant lot, right? But for you, that's the place where the Burger King used to be, right? And so so now you're building something in the space where the Burger King used to be, right? And so that there is this and I think too, Barbara, you talk about this creativity, and there's a sensitivity to development, and why I wanted to really go this route of structuring your development company, because you are interacting with people, you are interacting with people's memories of their community. And so what does it mean to buy that piece of land and then to do something? And now you are shifting what people now understand of that place, right? And that is also really important. So I'm just do this. We'll do some questions. So it's 4:19 now. The bar doesn't open until 4:30, so we have some time. So what we'll do is we'll take a couple questions now, and then we want to try to wrap up around 4:26 to give some transition. Will you give the mic? Aiden here will help. So we have questions. We'll go over here, and then we'll answer a few questions.
Thank you, and thank you for the information. Extremely informative and helpful. I was wondering if you could take some time, because, as I've worked the conference and spent some time talking to some people here, and getting to know a lot of people that are at the conference, a lot of them haven't done a development project yet, right? They've got a lot of really good interest, and we need that, and we need to encourage it. I know for myself, when I started as a developer, and I'm not ashamed to say that I bit off more than I could chew on my first projects, right? I was just so happy to get funding, right, that the next thing I know, I've got 7 single-family houses that I need to redevelop for 50% home ownership. I've got, 2 or 3 different fourplexes that need to be redeveloped for 50% AMI rentals. And it's like, man, I got the funding for acquisition and to get started, but I wasn't anywhere close to where I needed to be relative to having the funding to complete, and to complete on time, because in this game, time is money, right? And so I was wondering if you could spend some time talking about people not being afraid to start with small projects, because we all know really the only difference is the numbers, right? The same operations that you have to go through to do a small project is going to be the same operations that you have to go through to do a larger project. The funding sources may be different, but the pre-development work, right, and the understanding of the performing capital stacks, and moving with intentionality in terms of who you associate with and why you associate with them, and making sure that you have brand recognition is very important. So I know I'm taking a long time to explain this, but I think it's important because I remember being in a room like this when I first started. I remember feeling like I was drinking from a fire hose, right? And being somewhat discouraged because people were throwing around different subjects and conversations that I had no idea of what it even meant or what role it played in a developer's life. So I just want you to take some time to talk about that and to encourage people to start where they're at, but start in a situation where you can be successful.
Robert, can you start off with this? So thank you.
I dropped it. No, that's actually a really good question, first and foremost. I'll take it a step further as far as not being afraid to start with a small project. When people ask me what's the first thing they should do if they want to be a developer, my first response is always get a job in the real estate development industry. And I only say that because my first job was a commercial mortgage underwriter. My second job in commercial real estate was working for Corporex as a development associate. My third job was working at the Port Authority, on economic development. So I gathered all of those skill sets, which gave me the confidence to go out and do my own thing. So first and foremost, don't be afraid to get a job in the space, because just having a job alone, I met my development partners for Traversity while I was working at the port. I didn't know it at the time, but I carried myself well, established a good relationship, and we own a $4 million building in Walnut Hills because of that, because I had a job. Secondly, don't be afraid to just buy something that already exists. I share that because we own properties before I started Sanders Development Group. And I shared with this group earlier, I started the business in 2019, and then in March of 2020, COVID hit. And I said, man, damn, I should have took that job, right? But what happened is, because I owned investment property, which was a 3-family in Norwood, I sold it, and guess what? I got through the first year of operations, right? And then literally that next year, I landed the Triversity deal. Had I not just taken the small baby steps, right, at just owning real estate and getting the exposure that I needed, right, from interacting with other folks and professionals in this space, I don't know if my business accelerates as fast as it does. So that's my response to that question. Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing. And oddly enough, we don't talk about it, but our first development project was actually a single-family rehab in Avondale. Because of my experiences in commercial, I did one rehab, and then I was done with single-family rehabs.
I think, yeah, if you can start small, that is really amazing to be able to learn, because it's just as hard to do a big development as it is to do a small development oftentimes. And the city loves to say that when we're working through why things take so long to get out the door, but it's true. I also just want to say, I think you should give yourself some grace. I think development is really, really, really hard. I think we all sit up here having done it at some point and make it sound like it's a lot easier than it is, but it is hard, no matter what the scale is. The very first project I did was a facade improvement in College Hill, and I think we were looking at like maybe $1,600 a project. I mean, you can't get much smaller than that and still get city money in the deal. And I wasn't sure the amount of times I got the paperwork back because I did it wrong was probably like 3 times for each of these little projects that we did. It's just hard. Until you learn it, until you go through it, it's really, really hard. The flip side is development's about opportunity. You can want to buy that building all you want, but if they don't want to sell, you don't get to do it. So if it becomes available, you got to jump sometimes. And the scariest thing to do in development is to take the jump, because the difference between having to do a $1,600 project and a $500,000 park is a lot more cash that needs to be in your bank account. And when I first hired people in College Hill, I managed to convince the board not to give me a $5,000 raise so I could hire 3 people. It's a $150,000 difference. Not sure why anybody took that deal, but they did. And I said, don't worry, we're going to figure this out. And I still could not tell you to this day how we figured it out, but we figured it out. And so that jump can be terrifying when you start small. So you may have been lucky that you started overwhelmed, because you'd have been overwhelmed even when you started small. You gradually learn and grow, and you figure out, man, I would have done that a lot better if I had known what I know now. And that's the beauty of it.
I would just say the first small steps sometimes are the biggest ones, right? I mean, that sounds a little cliche, but I mean, kind of taking that leap, the first, leap of faith, holding hands with all of your friends and teammates who are going to be there along the way, it can be really scary. But I think that's the most important step, is sort of, I think Majora said, I think be there, be present, take that calculated risk. I will also give another example. There's a local developer that I think several of us, Seth and I have both worked with, called 8K, and it was 3 guys who were friends, and they started their company with $8,000, which is why they're called 8K, and now they're one of our premier local developers that works with a lot of CDCs. So it doesn't always take, some rich grandfather or whomever to get things started. Sometimes it really is starting extremely small, being able to, agree to take a calculated risk, and learning every step along the way so that the next project is a little bit better and a little bit easier.
I think that is incredible. And just to really close this out, I mean, to that point, it's all a hustle. Like you hustle and you grind and you work hard. And the folks in this city that do $100 million deals have the same sweat above their brow as the person that is doing their first single family, right? It is the same source of I don't know if this is gonna happen, right? So that idea, that feeling, I don't think that feeling actually ever goes away. So, that's also probably, probably psychopaths and enjoy it. But, all right. We are getting ready to go to happy hour. Robert, Seth, Rachel, thank you so much. Thank you for your information. Thank you for sharing. Thank you all for being engaged. I love the note taking. You guys are some incredible note takers. I sit back there scribing. You're like, enjoy yourselves. We'll have our happy hour right out here at Fiona's. Thank you so much.